Hello, welcome to Windows on the World. This is our weekly slot, 8 p.m. We also do a show at 9 p.m. on Sundays. And I've got Eric von Essex guesting with me tonight. We've been guesting on each other's live streams lately and discussing some very important things. I'm going to be talking a bit about mass hypnosis, the magic of mass hypnosis. And I've been doing a lot of research recently. I've got some great shows coming up, really good shows. I've got some historical stuff that I'm going to be putting out. Last week we did one with Edmund Marriage, and that was all about the Garden of Eden, which was in Babylon. And I've been doing some more research into a lot of this historical narrative that we put out before. I got a bit stuck with it actually at one point, because we've got this idea of the advanced civilization, and then we've got the post-flood, the post-deluge world. And I've looked into all this stuff that Graham Hancock's put out, lots of other researchers too. And there's a lot of places where you can't get past, but we have to sort of join the dots. And that's what bit like what these shows are for, really, to join the dots. And we join the dots with not just historical narratives, but the way society has been engineered. And that's a big part of the shows that we put out. In fact, the last few shows we've done have been very much focused on that. We've had Archons of the New Age, which I think was a brilliant show. Because we got into really where this hive mind came from and how it mentored people into this new age idea. I was talking to someone today about this, and it's very, very prevalent. And the people who are mentored into this program often don't know that they're in a program, which is very problematic, because what you'll get is people going, oh, why are you being so negative? Why are you being against the consensus? You know, the C word, the consensus, all stuff that we've been bringing up for ages. We also did a great show a while ago called The Man Who Saw the Future, a fellow called George Hunt, who was at the World Wilderness Conference in 1987. And he outlined how the World Bank was going to set up an environmental facility, a conservation bank, to basically control the world through climate change and mitigation. The money's in mitigation. You lend countries money to mitigate against the big bogeyman climate change. When they can't pay it back, you grab the assets. It's a very simple concept and not one that's hard to grasp, but it's very hard to grasp for people who've been mentored into a program. In other words, if they believe that anthropogenic global warming is real, and they believe that Greta Thunberg is telling the truth, and they believe that Extinction Rebellion is a protest group, that's where the problems start. I think it's great that we've been covering all this stuff and going into the sort of ideologies behind it, really. I find it fascinating, and it's something we'll continue to do. We did also a show called The Big Green Ego, and that was very funny. It was about people who've been mentored into a way of thinking, and they can't think outside it. In other words, they're extremists. And we're going to be doing a show next Wednesday with Lark in Texas, and we've been exchanging information, and we have a lot in common. It was Bryza actually who put us in touch. Brian Hart put us in touch, and we've been having some great conversations. Next Wednesday, I'm going to be doing a show with Lark in Texas, all about this hive-mindedness, communitarianism. That's the container for a lot of these ideologies. It's this broader ideology of communitarianism. So, Chris, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Yes, hello, Mark.
Yes, I can see you're whirring around a bit there, but that's fine. Yes, we're going to talk all about their social engineering stuff tonight, hypnosis, the hive mind, all the rest of it. And yeah, you've been looking at a local conference that's going on, a local event. Can you tell us a bit about that? Because that really ties into what we're talking about here.
That's right. It's at a place called Waltham Abbey. And I'm not getting any, I don't know these people. I've never even met them. I only saw this on Facebook. It's a place called Healing Horizons. And they're going to do on the 30th of this month a free demonstration on hypnotherapy and how it can change your life. And I thought, that's interesting. So I'm going to push myself along there and have a look, find out all about it, and report back, because I want to see the link between that and the way society is being controlled by these change agents. So I'm going to sit back. It's just a demonstration, and take note and hopefully have a word with the woman that's actually running it. So I'm really looking forward to the 30th of January. It's a nice freebie evening, so I'm going along. And if anybody else is interested, it's at Waltham Abbey, and it's called Healing Horizons, and you can find it on Facebook. It's not on their website; it's actually on Facebook, and I found it by accident. But I've never been in the place. I've never been anywhere near. I don't know anything about it. So I'm going to be as new as if anybody else comes along. So again, I've only just walked past the place. I've never been in there. So interesting. So I'm going along. But going
yeah,
on,
there was. I remember going to a mind, body, spirit type event in Waltham Abbey a few years ago, which is pretty near to you as well. And that was interesting. We had a psychic called Agnes. My friend was driving around this psychic, and she died a few years ago, this lady, but she was very theatrical. She was of the Madame McCarthy, Oscar Wilde type of psychic, you know. Oh, is there anybody there? Is there anybody there? Please give us a sign. Oh, you're there.
I think she wants Dick.
This is really funny.
I think
she said we put her into this place. We took her to this other place. My friend was driving around, and she goes, "I cannot work with the spirits behind me." Yeah, it's all a bit much.
That sort of place. There's a place. I know the girl in, or woman rather. Sorry, that's rather an insult. Debbie, and a place called White Witch, which is rather interesting. And you know, you go in there and some stuff for witches and that. But it's very interesting. I have to say, she's a very knowledgeable lady who runs it. You know, but yeah. So as I say, I'll report back on that. But what we were talking about earlier, it's something admittedly, I might be putting 2 and 2 together and making 100, but it seems to me, I was watching another advert here. Christ, I wish I was getting paid for this. I'd be worth a lot of money. I was looking at Richard D. Hall's latest. If you go onto YouTube, Richard D. Hall, or richplanet.net, he was talking about the doctor. Now, my German's not very good, all right? Ryke, Geared Hammer, Hamer. And if I've got this correct, what it is, he found out he actually had a major shock in his life. And his son died, and he got cancer. And he was a doctor, and I think he was a surgeon, but don't hold me on that. And he thought, well, hang on, why has this happened? And he started to look into brain scans. And he discovered that everybody that had actually had a shock, soon after, or they developed cancer. Not everybody, but you know, let's reword that. I got around back to front. Cancer patients that came to him had a shock in their life, and they scanned their brain scan, and they found these strange lesions on their brains. And what he discovered is that it was the brain that was the problem, and the cancer was a natural healing mechanism. And what he did, he treated the person's mind, because what happens if a person's got cancer? They go along to the hospital and they say, oh, I'm afraid you've got this, you've got that, we've got to do this, we've got to shove a tube up here and do this and do that, and then they go into shock. And then the shock is carried on and on and on. And what is that doing? That's making the cancer worse.
Yeah.
And apparently he found out most of these experts say it's a rogue cell that goes haywire. It isn't. He said it's a load of rubbish. And he cured 97% of his patients by using a kind of way of calming the mind, calming the brain. And he was incredibly successful, and that's why he was booted out of the medical profession and served several prison sentences. And obviously the medical mafia are really after him. The poor soul is now dead. He died a couple of years ago. But I put 2 and 2 together, and I had to sleep this night after watching this program. I'm going to watch it again. It's about 4 videos long, but it's well worth watching. And I thought, hang on a moment. Auto-suggestion. Auto-suggestion. Now, there's an old song done by a chap called Stanley Holloway. Now, that's before my time. My grandparents told me about it. I think he was in My Fair Lady film, something like that. But anyway, I don't know much about it. But if you go onto YouTube and tap in Stanley Holloway, My Word You Do Look Queer. Now, queering years ago meant ill. And
yes, it's the old music hall stuff, yeah.
That's right. And he went out one day and everybody went up to him and said, "My word, you do look queer." And eventually he started to feel ill. He thought, blimey. Oh, and then at the end he came up to a bloke who said to him, "My word, you do look well. You never looked so fit." And he went, "I feel great. My illness has gone." And it was all auto-suggestion. Now, the Aborigines have a ceremony called pointing the bone, or they did do it, I think it might be outlawed now, where they would point a bone at some poor sod and tell them to go away and die, and they did just that. I'm being rather simplistic about that. I suppose it's some kind of ceremony. But the North American Indians in Canada, they would, when they made their totem poles, they would select a tree, then via a ceremony, tell the tree next to the tree that they wanted to use that other tree as a totem pole, and the tree they told would tell the other tree, and the tree would just die. So they didn't have to hack it down, and they would use that as a totem pole. And there's all these different strange things. Now, what I'm wondering is, we're ruled by communism. I don't think there's ifs and buts about that. And every communist system is a death cult and obsessed with mass genocide. Now, gulags are expensive. Shooting people is a huge sort of operation. But if you can convince people that they're going to die and they're depressed and everything is down, because you look at it now, the amount of people suffering from depression is through the roof, and the amount of people going down with cancers is through the roof. But you switch the BBC local radio on, what have they got? Have you been diagnosed with this? Have you checked that? You walk down the road, there's charities, there's posters up. Did you know that obesity can lead to cancer? And everywhere is scaring the heebie-jeebies out of you.
Negative programming, yeah. There's a lot of negative programming. In fact, that's most of what programming is all about. And the negative programming is constant. So in other words, it's a bit like the Saul Alinsky thing. You have to keep agitating the enemy, the host, basically, attacking the host, or the parasite attacks the host constantly. So these are all just kind of natural things that everyone should know about. And yes, it ties into the whole agenda of what we talk about a lot as well, because a lot of this stuff is about intention, and we've actually covered a lot of this stuff. I think I think my camera's gone off. Hang on a minute, I'll just start it up again. I think it's things about intention. Intention is a really important thing, and it's not always what people think. A lot of this stuff goes into extra dimensional areas as well, such as you've got things like psychic attack and all this kind of stuff. All this stuff we've looked into over the years. I tried to put everything together, and I'm actually reading this book at the moment called Devils and Evil Spirits of Babylon, which was sent to us by one of our listeners, and it's really interesting. It was put together in 1903, but it really also is all about this stuff, and it's always been known. So societies have always been controlled through various types of intention and what is now called social engineering or psychological operations, because most of what we're actually living under is psychological operation. It's a psychological operation. Everything that is being done to the public. Greta Thunberg is a psychological operation, because obviously you can't criticize her because you criticize the child, and you hate children if you criticize her. The whole thing's back to front. In fact, what it is, it's the opposite of what the public are actually being led to believe it is. So most things are completely the wrong way around. And when I've been looking at this sort of social engineering stuff, how it goes on, it's It's actually quite simple. A lot of it's very simple, but the public aren't trained to see it because they think society works in a certain way. Society doesn't work in the way that the public believe. The common good has nothing to do with the good of the public. The common good is about making things look as though they are acceptable, making the public feel as though they're somehow engaged in something that they're not engaged in. So when we talk about these terms, most of them have been hijacked to mean something else. And I've been talking a lot about communitarianism. Communitarianism was really the end of the 18th century. And that was when it was first sort of bandied about. But basically, it's about collective rights over individual rights. Really, that's what it's about. And the whole of the way society is now is about that. And the New Age agenda and this narcissism really does tie into that too, because they're all... If you've got a very narcissistic population, they're incredibly easy to control. And like you're saying, they're all obsessed with themselves. In fact, Manly P. Hall did say in 1928 in Secret Teachings of All Ages that the new demonism is this new form of self-empowerment. In other words, what was becoming the New Age, this think and grow rich mentality, all about visioning intention, all this sort of stuff. It is a kind of demonism. So he said, even though the old-fashioned type of medieval demonism may be gone, well, I don't think it is, because I think it's very prevalent today. So all of these things tie in, and you can't, my camera keeps going off, and you can't actually, what you can't do is isolate issues with all this. You have to actually see the whole thing as a whole, and the whole of the idea of what these social engineering programs are is to stop you seeing the whole and to concentrate on things of absolutely no importance. Commitments to shared values. We hear all these sort of terms: well-ordered society, dependent on institutions, the NGOs that basically run society now. They're all mentoring people into one hive mind way of thinking, and if you're outside that, then you're an extremist, you're a Nazi, you're a fascist, you're an anti-Semite, you're there's only a few of these terms. You're full of hate, you're an outlier. All of these terms are just used by the media because when you have to do something that's in the common good, it has to make it look as though everyone's agreed, and then they call that consensus.
That's right. The thing that I find quite disturbing is that with communism, well, there's an old saying, Russian saying, that says, in order to look forward, you've got to keep one eye in the past. And history repeats itself. And when you look at statistics, now I don't go too much on statistics, but apparently this is a well-known fact, apparently, that when the Russian Revolution occurred, less than 7%, I'll repeat that, 7% of the Russian population supported the revolution and supported communism. When Mao took charge in China in 1948, less than 1% supported Mao. So just remember those very small percentages. How did they do it? Well, they did it by gaining what is called a consensus. So, right. In other words, through the media, they made it look as though these ideas were popular. And that's a very interesting thing, because through the media, exactly the same thing has happened with the climate change agenda. There are many people who are actually scared to say anything because they get beaten down by the mob. And that's what it is. You don't need that many people actually who are in charge of this, because when you control the narrative, then it doesn't matter. If you control what's going on to television, it doesn't matter. The rest of it doesn't matter. And once you get these amount of people on board, then the people who are controlling the narrative can control the masses, the rest of the people. It's very, very easy, and it's all done through psychology. Yes, and we're talking about things like the social dimension of a person, basically magic and spell casting. All of this stuff is actually part of what this communitarian agenda is, and I just call it the hive mind. But when we talk about communitarianism, it goes back to David Cameron, but obviously it's a much older concept than that, and it was kind of used by social engineers. In other words, you don't want people to think they're under a totalitarian regime. How do you do that? How do you keep society for the common good, which means everyone's mentored into the same ideas?
Well, what you do is you enforce it. You get the people to enforce it on themselves through the media. It's very, very simple. Like the propaganda. Propaganda is extremely powerful on academics. Academics basically are part of the system. The system reflects them. The academic reflects the system. It's a mutual parasitic relationship between the two. So academics will defend to the death what they've learned. They do not want to have to learn it again. They don't want to have new ideas. So this is all written into it. It's all very interesting that people actually don't like change. So what they do is they keep using change, enabling change. I got that from this the big green ego, one of these people who actually started. It was only a bit of childish slander, but I like to bring these things into an area where it's positive, and it's almost like it's a research area. So in other words, these sort of negative things that you get all the time if you put out information, they can be very useful to actually explore the program of what's going on. So I always see it like that now, and that takes away the stress from it as well, which you would talk about earlier. This is a very interesting point about this stress, because I've actually thought exactly the same lines as that, and exactly the same lines. And all this stuff about stress and internalizing stress is very, very interesting and very much part of what's going on, because the internalized stress is where the problem is, and that's what you do. You can control people through internalized stress. It's basically a very powerful form of mind control. And then we've got all the new age, we've got this interest in Kabbalah, this interest in sort of low-level black magic is what it is. That's where the self-empowerment stuff came in, of this idea that you could actually vision the future. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Potentially want to do it. I mean, I always remember it was very interesting that when I was younger, I would imagine myself doing the thing that I wanted to be good at, and I'd have these little daydreams about it, and that reinforces it, because then you do actually work towards the intention. The intention then comes true. But where it goes wrong, I think, this stuff is when people are into this kind of very new agey sort of concept, and they think that anything outside of their little utopia is negative. Well, that doesn't work. That doesn't work at all, because the thing is about the whole hive mind thing is, if you're going to do anything that's going to have any lasting effect, or that's going to actually change anything, you're going to be attacked by a lot of negative forces. And this is where it's very clever. So in other words, you get the people who go, oh, that's really negative, I don't want to engage with that. Well, you've been programmed into not engaging. You've been programmed to be acquiescence. You've been programmed to be weak, and you're accepting it. And that is a very powerful thing that we try and expose. In other words, there's nothing negative about putting out truth. What you're going to do is you're going to upset people, but facts are facts, I'm afraid. Unless facts can be rebutted, then they stand. And the good thing about this is, through the things like natural law, which is totally opposite to what we're talking about here. Natural law is basically the way things work in an organic way. Things do work like that. Things have their own kind of outcomes if people are working together. But what this new agenda does is it forces people to work together and to lose their minds, basically. So that's what's interesting about it. Once people have lost their minds can be implanted with all sorts of stuff. They're auto-suggestive. They're basically like biological robots. And this, what you're saying about this trauma thing is incredibly important. And the thing is, I've actually got into that myself. I've had real shocks over the past few years, and what you're saying does resonate with me. So what you have to do is you have to kind of be able to get rid of that. And there are stress disorders that people get where they can't get rid of it, and it comes out as rage. And I've seen this loads of times. It's very, very common. And a lot of people have it to an extent. They have trigger points. There's trigger points where you'll react, and because if you get attacked over and over again over something, then those trigger points will always be there. So I think that this is a really interesting conversation, Chris. Yeah, my camera's gone off again. Switch. I don't know why it keeps doing that, but it keeps us on our toes, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I've got a feeling the powers that be are sort of trying boosting signals or something towards your camera because it keeps switching it off. But you're right, it is a fascinating subject, and it's like the jigsaw puzzle. We're getting pieces I mean, you might get a few pieces and you try and get a picture, but you won't get the picture right. But we're getting more and more and more and more pieces together. And the only time I listen to the radio is in my car or in the morning to listen to the weather forecast. That's basic. That's all. And I haven't got a television. And sometimes I might forget and leave it on. And if you want manic depression, just leave the talk shows on in the morning.
Where's the manic bit?
It's sort of, how many, no, was it? The best one so far has been, do you realise that your children will not live long due to climate change? That's nice, isn't it? And the other one is, how is your cancer checks doing? Who come up with anything astonishing? And so that's for the what I call the super duper boopers that are in and out the and this check, that check, and cross knows what check. The medical mafia worshippers. They think, oh, it's marvellous, yes. I took the wrong leg off, but did a lovely operation on it, that type. And all the time, it's got this subtle death, fear, shock, all the time. And you walk down the high street, you've got posters up saying, like I said, obesity can cause cancer and cancer charities. I mean, if you go to my local shopping centre on a market day, you've got to avoid all the charity people. There's about, the maximum I've seen is 5 of them that you've got to avoid. Hello, sir, how are you today? And have you got lots of money you can give me? And that sort of rubbish. And I think our society, let's face it, is a cheap way of killing people, literally by doing it psychologically. Look how depressed everyone is, how down everybody is. Look at the films of the 1940s and 50s. They were uplifting to make people feel good, feel happy. Songs were happy. Now look at it, depression, drab, everything's down, oh, we're terrible, unemployment's high. And again, I really do believe that they've looked at this very deeply, because you've got to remember that I think it was the Rockefellers, was it? And they were very into looking at tribal activity in the 1950s. And one of their sons went missing in Papua New Guinea and was never found. And they reckon he legged it and probably lived with a tribe, but who knows? That's a mystery. So they knew about this auto-suggestion, and they knew about it in the 1930s because my late mother, she was a teenager, and as we've all been through our teenage years, you get worried about everything and you feel a bit stressed out. One of our friends went to a faith healer, and this faith healer was an elderly man, and he could see my mother was very nervous now. He put his hand on her head and he said, "My dear, your body works from your mind. Just remember that." And that had an incredible effect on my mother, and she was often saying that throughout her life. Your body works from your mind. And the other thing was on Rainier's program many years ago. He was saying that there was a shipwreck and there was 2 lifeboats in the sea. In one lifeboat, the captain of the lifeboat was positive, and the other one, he was negative. It was, well, we're not going to get picked up. Have you written your wills yet? And all this. And the other bloke was, right, we're going to have some fun today. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, and I'm sure I'll rescue. And then he showed you film of these 2 lifeboats being rescued. And the lifeboat where it was positive, the people walking up and down the deck thinking, oh, stretch my legs a bit. And where it was negative, they're being taken off in stretchers and had to spend a couple of weeks in hospital. Now, I've been trying to find that on YouTube, but I haven't found it. But I remember that program very clearly. Again, doesn't that make you think? They were in hospital being taken off, and you can see them stretchers coming off these boats, whilst the other people are sort of looking down, going, oh dear, that's a shame, isn't it? And they had exactly the same supplies. So, one boat didn't go more hungry than the other. They had exactly the same. Makes you think. It really does. And
yeah, that's interesting stuff. I mean, all this kind of less tangible information and this ability to heal things and heal your body. It's quite interesting because I think you're onto a very, it's a good general point you've made. But I smashed my arm up a few years ago. I broke it backwards against the wall. I'd come back from a gig and I was unloading my van and I tripped over and my arm went up in the air, basically up in the air, broke backwards like that, broke backwards against the wall. So they call it a corkscrew fracture. And yeah, when I had the x-ray, it was just the bone coming down from here was just the shape of a corkscrew, and there was nothing in the middle. There was nothing here at all. So it was the worst thing I'd ever seen. When I saw the x-ray, there was no arm there. There wasn't an arm left. It was just shattered. There was no, it was just bits. There was nothing there. There was no bone in the middle bit here. This middle bit here, there was no bone at all. There was nothing there on that bit, there to there. There's nothing. So I said to them, I didn't want it pinned. I didn't want it pinned, and they actually set it wrong as well. It broke again and into loads of pieces until they got it right and put it in this sling. And there was a specialist at the hospital, and he said, I think it'll be all right, but you're going to have to keep it very, very still. And of course, you wake up when you've lied on it, and it's absolute agony. You have to sit sleeping up and all that. To call a very long story short, what happened was I got some remote healing, and then I got people doing healing on it. And it seemed to kind of get this energy going through the body, which it's like a Reiki thing really, but it seemed to rebalance things. It was a rebalancing thing. And then I was taking knit bone as well for it, and I didn't actually go for the last x-ray, and it's fine now. It's probably stronger than it was before, but that's a bit of a miracle, because what the hospital wanted to do first of all was pin it with metal, and I just wouldn't let them do it. I let it heal itself. So there is a lot to this stuff, and I think you've got to be careful. You've got to be very selective and thoughtful about the way you're applying this stuff, because I think that there's a certain amount of delusion and fantasy, and that's got nothing to do with awareness. And I think that's a big problem with the New Age stuff, because it's all about people wanting a quick fix, basically. And I don't think this stuff is that simple. It took me a really long time to learn how to switch off and meditate properly. But once I did it, I could do it all the time. I can do it when I'm driving. I can do it when I'm working. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal at all, you know. So I think that this stuff is kind of obvious, and it's just been taken away, that's all.
Well, it is. I mean, look at the 1939 Cancer Act. You're not allowed to say you found a cure. That's why they say it's in remission. And we all know what's happened to the GC Math, the chap who was marketing that. I don't know. I think I don't know if he's in jail or not. But the big pharma do not want there to be well, they know that there is cures because they're making shed loads of money from their actual well, they're supposed to be curing, but actually making you worse.
Yeah, well, prescription drugs are 70% ineffective.
And also often actually prescribed incorrectly. Now, I lost a dear friend of mine last year. She died of cancer. And when she was initially diagnosed, she went into shock, obviously. And she had the white coat wagging finger brigade. And she was very into homeopathy and things like that. Hello, we've lost Mark, so I'll have to wing it on my own for a little while. Oh,
it's all right. I'm just trying to get back on, Chris, because
yeah, okay,
I've frozen up.
Yeah. Oh dear, he's frozen. But I was going to say, and she had what's this? Not radium. There's the other therapy, chemotherapy, and because she was put under incredible pressure, and she was totally against chemotherapy and things like that. But you think the poor girl, she had this terrific shock, and she had previously had a shock, which had actually, I think, brought this along. Brought this cancer on. And then from there on, she had this chemotherapy, which obviously made things worse. So then she took some, shall we say, what you can buy in a well-known health food shop, but shall we say a little bit more stronger than you can buy in a health food shop. I won't say any more than that. and it was helping her. But when she went along for these checkups, she saw a bloke, and I'll never forget her telling me, she called him Dr. Death. And it was a pan-faced bloke, and he said, I'm afraid there's nothing you can do. You may not see the year out. Blah, 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 blah. Have you made a will? You're going to get worse. This is going to happen. And I was thinking, and the poor girl, what she was going through. So she's not only got the shock of that, she's not only got her illness, but she's got Dr. Death sort of wagging the finger. And she said it was, well, she didn't say it, but I got the impression it was satanic. And these people are really bloody creepy. And
yeah, I got that in the hospital. That happened to me. I had this really creepy doctor when I went in. My arm was completely smashed, and he set it wrong, and I'm sure he did it on purpose because I didn't want it pinned. I'm sure he did it on purpose. I felt that he did it on purpose. It was like I got a sixth sense of what this fellow was about, and I think these
satanic.
These people are get into positions of power. They like power. So you have to be aware of that all the time, and especially with the way things are, because we have this sort of social Darwinist kind of idea of society, and people are sort of competitive to start with. So all of this stuff is very easy to put into the mix, and you get these people who are change agents who are mentored into using these very draconian tactics, psychological tactics, and you can see them a mile off once you get used to it, though.
Well, my mother, my late mother, she went in for an operation. I'm going back about 12, 15 years now. And the surgeon that was going to do it, my father was shocked because he was with my mother. And the surgeon said, it was a knee. She had terrible arthritis in her knee. And he said, okay, if you could sign it. And then with a smile, he went, well, you could die on the operating table. I looked at him. And that was exactly the way my father told me what happened. He said he was shocked. Well, you could die on the operating table. And it was really sort of sick. I mean, to have your leg cut open is not very nice, first of all. And my mother was obviously worried about it. And you could see she was a very nervous woman. And it looked very psychopathic. From what my father told me, this surgeon sounded like a psychopath, because psychopaths get a kind of buzz from stress and tension. They love stress and tension. That's why those in power are mainly psychopaths and educated twits, because that's how Mao and Stalin ran their reign of terror and fear, because they thrive on terror and fear. And who can run that? But the only people who can run that is educated twits. Yes, sir, I've read all the books, I'll do exactly that. That's it.
Yeah, well, it's all part of this way things are engineered, and that ties into magic and spell casting, and basically how society is actually, controlled. I mean, it's interesting because you've got the people who are actually controlling it, people who know about psychology, and all of these people are just basically playing a part within it, and they call it the greater good, the common good. And we have a web of reinforcing opinions and narratives, and that's all it is over and over again. The other thing is that ties into what you're talking about is creating crises. Creating crises is incredibly important to keep society in a state of perpetual fear and to keep it under control. So the crisis has to come from outside. It has to be a threat. It has to be something that people believe is a threat, whether that's another country, whether it's, we get all this talk about the threat of something external like a UFO invasion. All of this stuff has been thought about, and most of our listeners here will know about these things, because once you start researching it, you find out that, yes, all of these are just tools, ways to control people. And there has to be a bogeyman, something external from the outside. That's a threat or an implied threat, and that can work quite well. I mean, it also goes into the legal system. I mean, you can actually really intimidate people through words. Words are very, very powerful, and when they're written down, they're even more powerful. So learning about law and actually taking apart what's really being said and the intentions behind things is very, very important. And yeah, the creating crises is one of the most important things that keeps society under control. And of course, the biggest thing we're having at the moment is the climate. Yes, climate change is going to kill us. And now we've got Davos. We've got these people there. The hotel they're staying in the rooms start at £10,000 a night. Now that, you know, this is pretty obscene stuff. You've got that Greta Thunberg. There was another useful idiot being put up there. Some child, you know, the indigenous people. Well, everyone's indigenous to some way, you know. And then you've got these elders and the indigenous people, and then they put these children up there talking absolute rubbish that they've been given a sheet of paper by the UN to read out. And the public look at it and think, wow, they're an example to us all. They're an example to us all. You know, it's absolutely incredible.
Well, it is. It is. But I mean, if you look at, I don't know if anybody here has heard of Eustace Mullins. He wrote a book, Death by Injection, in the 1980s. And it's free, I found, to download on the internet. So worth reading. And there's also, he's on YouTube talking about it with a chap. And it's what he said is that I think he's on the button. He's 100% true. We've been fooled into this sort of fake medicine because people don't openly realise that the NHS was set up in 1948 on a fraud. Now, if you speak to the older generation, say my parents' generation, if they were still alive now, they say, oh, the NHS was fantastic, you know, medicine in the 1930s and during the what was, oh, it's terrible, you know, it's only those that could afford it, could go to the doctor and stuff like that. Well, yes, that is correct to a point. And I think there was a lot of well-meaning politicians that set up the NHS, like Nye Bevan and that. I think he was a well-meaning man, and I think his heart was in the right place. So I'm not condemning those people, but what is left out of the scripts when the NHS was set up, all homeopathic medicine was literally swept away. They destroyed hundreds of years of research, and there was a campaign of looking at it as quackery, even though it had been well proven. And the reason for that was because the petrochemical companies had made a fortune during the war producing anthrax and God knows what chemical weapons and nuclear weapons and whatever. And that's why after the war, they realized that their profits are going to go down. So it was a deal, and that's why you have nuclear medicine. And they used spin-offs from the nuclear industry, the chemical industry, and things like that to put into medicine that was completely untried, unproven, because I thought, oh, it's modern. And that is something that's missed out of the history of the NHS. But when you look at hospitals, to me, they're satanic hellholes, because the old Chinese way of medicine was they'd have a herb garden, because people were treated by it with herbs, and have it so that the doors and windows would be open most of the time, so the smell of herbs would waft through a wall and make people feel better. And they could look out of the herb garden, and that psychologically would make them feel better. But you look at hospitals. I mean, when my late parents, I looked after them. When I willed the mother and the father into to go into a hospital and that. The waiting room is full of posters telling you what you got to check and what you haven't got to check and what could be falling off of you, and you've got to have awareness of this, awareness of that. That was the House of Horrors. And then when you went to when I saw my father was in the hospital, now he'd never seen a doctor for years, and then he had a stroke and he went in hospital. My mother was the same. They avoided doctors. And there's this room, and it's just like a kind of conveyor belt medicine. There's nothing to stimulate the mind. It's just blank walls. And I really do believe, okay, there was a lot of very nice nurses and nice doctors, but a lot of them were very pervy, I think, very strange, very sadistic. And I got the feeling that a number of them had actually bought their qualifications in the third world, where you can buy medical qualifications.
That's actually quite well known. That happens a lot, and that's not an uncommon thing at all. Yeah, I've covered a lot about the NHS and how it's been taken down, and it was planned to be taken down. A friend of mine, Peter Bark, made a film called NHS Sell-Off, and I had people telling me that the NHS was privatised 15 years ago. Balfour Beatty were putting all the infrastructure into the hospitals. They were owning everything, leasing everything back to the hospitals. I have friends who work in doctor surgeries, these big ones where they take anybody on. It's being collapsed by design because it can't carry on. So that's the thing. It's not in the public interest to have the NHS. It's in the public interest for them to pay for their healthcare, and it's in the public interest for them to be able to die if they can't pay for it. That's the way things work. It's a business plan. It's been turned into a business plan. The whole idea of this whole kind of socialism is gone. That's finished. That's went a long time ago, and a lot of people just don't realise the way things have been restructured. The NHS is privatised. It's privatised. It's done. It's just that the public haven't really been told properly yet. And the public also aren't interested enough, because unless it directly affects them at the time, they tend to leave it all to the last minute to think about. I mean, the thing is about hospitals, you don't go in them, as you're saying, unless you actually have to. I mean, the only time I've been into hospital was actually when I broke my arm skateboarding when I was 16, and when I smashed my arm up as an older teenager when I was about 52, when I smashed it to pieces through tripping over, basically. So I don't go to hospitals. I don't use doctors at all. The thing is that if you break a bone, then you do need to go to these places. You can't really deal with it yourself. You need to get strapped up properly. But in my case, they didn't even do that. I ended up in a right state, because when they'd messed it up and I left the hospital at 3 o'clock in the morning, I got into a cab. As soon as I hit the road humps, it all came out. My arm just broke up into pieces again. So I was just in agony. I had to pull this cast off myself, and they gave me laughing gas and all the rest of it on the way back. But you know, that's another thing about these road humps. I mean, if you're in an ambulance, it's absolute murder, you know. I mean, every time it went over, the pain was unbelievable, just going over a road hump. And these things, of course, people don't know until it's too late. But yeah, that's taken us into Agenda 21, into the whole thing of what's happening, the re-engineering of society, which we talk about in our talks, the bigger picture. And I just wanted to give you some dates actually for that, because we've got one coming up this Saturday in Fairbourne, which is a place in North Wales, in Gwynedd in North Wales, and it's been threatened with decommissioning. I got onto the local paper, the Cambrian Times. I did an interview with the person who was writing there, one of the journalists. I said, it's good that you're a family-run newspaper. However, I don't think these people actually do believe you, even when you give them facts about what's going on. So I'm not that optimistic whether it's going to write a good or bad story, or if the story is going to be featured at all. But we're there on Saturday in Fairbourne Village Hall, and this place is going to be decommissioned over the next 30 to 40 years. And of course, you've got Lloyd saying who they're going to insure, who they're not going to insure. This is going to be very interesting, because now obviously we've got Mark Carney from the World Bank, who's looking after all the mitigation and the climate change stuff for the UN World Bank. And that's why they're ramping it up at Davos. That's why they've got kids screaming at you, because you now have to be mentored into having everything taken off you. It's not good enough that you're taxed. They want your property. They want to retrofit your houses. The citizens' assemblies have actually voted to retrofit their own houses. They've been steered into this with a series of questions which are pointed. In other words, don't you want to save the planet? Well, you've got to say, we've all got to save the planet, haven't you? Very, very simple Delphi technique, they call it. They mentor you into this group consensus by a bit of trickery, really. All it is, it's like a salesman trying to sell you two types of windows. Do you want the green one or the blue one? Well, the green one's out of stock. You're going to have the blue one. The blue one's cheaper anyway. It's dead simple, this stuff. There's nothing complicated about it. What's complicated about it is the layers that it works through society. People don't realize that there's one template being rolled out everywhere, and that template is absolutely everything. It's absolutely massive, this stuff. Let me just get back to these talks now, because they're all on the windowsontheworld.net. On the 8th of February, we're at the Corner House, 1 Christchurch Street, East Frome, BA111QA. It's Frome. I think it's Somerset, isn't it? And we're at 11 a.m. till 6 p.m. You can book that on windowsontheworld.net. So if you're in Somerset, please do that. Book and come to see us. Myself, Piers Corbyn, Sandy Adams, give you the bigger picture of how all this works and how it fits together. On the 9th of February, 12 till 7:30 p.m. with the Dartmouth Inn Totnes. That's they're all £10 on the door, these, for the whole day. And Saturday 22nd of February, Worthing, East Sussex. There's an Eventbrite bookings page at windowsontheworld.net for that. And I've got a load of really good guests coming up. We're going to have Lark from Texas next week, Wednesday 8 p.m, talking all about the communitarian agenda. And then I've got Ahmed Osman, who's going to be talking about the origins of King David and is there an Egyptian connection? He thinks there is. And we went to the British Museum. I'm going to be putting out a video soon that you can actually have a look at, which is him talking about this book and his work. He's a very interesting man, Ahmed Osman. We did a show with him ages ago called Moses Was Akhenaten. He looks at these historical narratives and finds that they run parallel to the narratives that he's finding. So I find all that stuff, it's fascinating. And I got into talking to him about the difference between the difference with the Medina and Mecca and the different types of ideology that went into Islam. We talked about this at great length last week, so I'm looking forward to getting him on because he knows a lot about that particular religion, and that's something I do want to talk about because I've been looking into the historical narratives, and also we're going to be setting up something which is going to be great with very learned scholars who are questioning history, and we're going to have this history project. So all of this stuff I'm doing, and we've got this film called The Heretics of Smithfield, all about people who were burnt at the stake in the Middle Ages, and you can support us on Patreon and basically help us to do our research by supporting us on Patreon. Go to windowsontheworld.net. That's the advert section over. Into a bit of a kind of promotional thing. I have to do it really because I don't think some people look at the website. So do look at windowsontheworld.net because all of the dates are on the homepage, and we need your support. That's what it's all about, really. We need your support. Last bit of the show, I'd like to get on to a book that's just come out, and I'm going to be featuring Jerry Marzinski and Sherry Swiney. Jerry Marzinski is a psychiatric practitioner, and he's American, and he's been on our show many times. And we've done several shows with Jerry, and demons are real ? Demons are real ? Well, this is all about paranoid schizophrenia as being demonic possession, and this goes back to what the ancient Sumerians believed in. They believed that possession happened. They believed that they had ghosts, which were basically people who were restless souls who didn't want to leave the earthly plane. They didn't want to move on. And then you had full-on demons, which are basically entities. And I find this area fascinating. And the stuff that Jerry goes on about, I've not heard anybody in the psychiatric profession talking about it ever. He's put out this book. It's just come out. I've got a copy. He sent me a copy the other day. I'm about 25 pages in, and it's a really good read. I'd recommend this to anybody. It's called An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower by Jerry Marzinski and Sherry Swiney. I'm going to be interviewing Jerry. You can find his work on Off the Left Eye, which is the Emanuel Swedenborg channel on YouTube. And he does quite a lot of interesting stuff there. Swedenborg got into very multi-layered ideas of existence. I find some of it rather complicated. I try and keep these things quite simple. But yeah, all of this is all part of social engineering. So we did a show ages ago, didn't we, Chris, all about this interdimensional stuff and, of course, psychic attacks, intrusion by these entities. It's a fascinating area.
Well, yeah, that really is fascinating. And to another area, which is a bit depressing, and that is elderly euthanasia, because my father, I think, was euthanized by the NHS. I'm pretty sure it was. And that is happening on a big scale. That's my own belief.
Yeah, I've just been told, Chris, that my microphone level is about twice the volume of yours. So I should try and get into my settings. Can you turn yours up by any chance?
Yeah, I'll try. Where are we? Diddly diddly dum. What am I doing? Camera mic. Where are we? All day audio. Yeah, mine seems to be right. How's that?
I wouldn't know, but just turn it up as much as you can.
Right. Where are we? Oh, hang on, I've got the wrong. Right, I'm turning up a little bit more. How's that? Is that better?
Well, hopefully the people in chat will tell us. I'll back off the mic a bit. I'll actually sit a bit further back and keep my voice down a bit.
People, I'm not. Is our sound all right now?
Your sound's fine. I can hear you perfectly. Yeah.
I think it's all right. I think they'll soon tell us if they can't hear us, you know. But no, this demonic possession and that, things like that, I find very, very fascinating, and also coincidences. There's a friend of mine. He was a comedy magician. I spoke about him before. There's two of them. Dave Starbuck. And there's another Dave Starbuck, but this is the chap from up north. And he said things don't happen by coincidence, and I found that out. Things don't seem to happen by coincidence. Sometimes things seem to. There's some unbelievable coincidences that defy the laws of, shall we say, the statistics and things like that. You think, how did this happen? How did that happen? That's very, very odd. I mean, I gave an example. I think I said this either on your show or another show. That there's a pub near where I live that's been changed. They changed the name to the Freemason. They painted it jet black. It looks very sinister. So I went down there to take a picture of it. And as I taking a picture of it, there's a counsellor who I absolutely detest, who we've actually raised our voices against each other, crossed in the road and walked past me. We both gave each other a foul look, and he just sort of walked past me. Out of all the hours in the day, out of anywhere where I live, it has to be there. How comes? I mean, it's 1 to 1 chance. It's weird. It's very weird.
Well, I think this synchronicity stuff is actually very interesting because it's happened to me a lot over the years. There's one particular friend of mine, and I can never kind of work this out, that we have connections with just about everybody we know. Our lives interweave into a series of connections, not so much anymore, but over the period of about 15 years. She'd say, oh, my friend's got some trouble with this fella and he's run off without paying the rent and he's a chef. I said, oh, is his name John? Does he live in Walthamstow? Does he collect hats? And she said, yeah, how do you know? I said, because I know who you mean. And this has happened to me time and time again. That's just a small example, but our lives interlinked so much, but there was no apparent connection between us. It wasn't like she was working in the area of work that I work in at all. There's no connection, but she had this amazing series of connections. She knew 2 people in North Wales that I knew. One of them she went out with, who was an old school friend of mine. Another one was a girl who was in a band with me who I knew years ago, and she actually tapped me on the shoulder at the 100 Club about 10 years ago, and I hadn't seen her for about 20 years. But these things do happen, and I think they're to do with intention. And I think that when you get derailed off what you're meant to be doing, and what we were talking about earlier, when you get stressed out and things start going wrong, then you're fighting against the order of things, and you have to kind of try and get back into some kind of state of grace, they call it. You know, they call it a state of grace. So I think that's really important. And also it's also like creativity as well. When you're working on something, it's flowing really well, then there's a whole rhythm to it, and there's a harmonious kind of way that things work together. This is all common sense stuff, but society actually works against that because it imposes a kind of structure on things that needn't be there. For instance, it's not necessary for people to be controlled and managed to the extent they are. In fact, if you took away the police, there wouldn't be anarchy, as people say. Well, anarchy just means self-rule, doesn't it? It's a stupid thing to say, but there wouldn't be chaos. It wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen. Things would have their own order, and you would get crimes happening. You would get things happening, but there wouldn't be sort of mass rioting and looting. When these sort of mass riots happen, they're usually instigated by something. They don't just happen spontaneously. They have to be instigated. So the order of things is generally in place, and that's something which the communitarian system or the hive mind system, this new system of totalitarianism, in fact, is about. It's frightened of all that. So, in other words, the control system is frightened of natural law. It's frightened of natural processes. So it has to put trauma into the system. The system has to be fear-based. Otherwise, they think it won't work. It's a bit like the Middle Ages, where they were burning heretics. The whole idea of that, of heretico corrumbendo, this act of 1401, which meant that heretics could be burned to death under common law. through the church, through the ecclesiastical courts, then with the state writing a common law writ for execution. Well, the idea of that was to traumatize the population. If you burn someone alive publicly, then that is going to have a huge effect on the public who see it. So what they did was they started setting up these huge fires where people were burned publicly, and sometimes 6 or 7 at a time. And they thought that that was going to stop people, but in actual fact, it had the reverse effect, because the reformists, the people who were followers of William Tyndale and Wycliffe, who translated the Bible, the Bible translation was being fought over by, it was a battle between the people and the state being the church at that point. The church and state then separated under Henry VIII. It's a fascinating thing, but what that actually happened was that there was more and more martyrs. So in other words, the thought of being burnt to death did not put people off. They would still go and say that they'd say, if you abjure your heretical beliefs, if you do not believe that the Eucharist, which is the bread and the wine, if you do not believe when the bread and wine is broken and administered and given to be eaten and drunk by the congregation, if you do not believe that's the literal body and flesh and blood of Christ, then you're a heretic and you're going to burn at the stake. And a lot of them couldn't reconcile them with that. So the interesting thing was, they would go to these humiliating ceremonies, and then you'd get the priest would be degraded, the degrading of the priest, because a lot of priests were burnt at the stake for basically preaching the works of the New Testament and what was really in it. And so they would burn priests. The first priest to be burned was William Sultry in 1401, the same year this law came out, Heretico Corombendo. And basically that was followed up with the Act of 6 Articles in 1539. And that was all about, the Act of 6 Articles was again reinforcing heresy as being anybody who did not think that the bread and wine turned into the literal flesh and blood of Jesus Christ. So if you didn't believe that, you were a heretic, you'd be burned at the stake. So a lot of them couldn't reconcile it. So they would go through these processes with the priest would be degraded, he'd have his robe ripped off, they'd leave him in a cell, everything would be filthy, his robes would get filthy, they'd put a pauper's cap on him, they'd knock him down the steps of the altar with a staff, it would fall backwards, and often they got really badly hurt as well. They'd push them in the chest with the staff, and they'd go flying backwards and bang their heads on the floor and all this. It was really powerful stuff, but it was all about trauma, inducing trauma. And what happened was, you'd get these people who were so full of belief that they would rather burn to death than accept that the Universal Catholic Church was in the right and they were in the wrong. So that is amazing. You've got Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. I mean, he watched his 2 fellow priests being burnt to death, and he was actually traumatized by the whole thing. But in the end, when he was going to recant and say, no, I believe that the Universal Church is right, he got up in the church in Oxford, St Mary's Church, and he said, as for the right hand will burn first. This is the hand that wrote the confession, which I now withdraw. Everything that I've written with this unworthy right hand is now deemed to be taken away forever. In other words, it didn't exist. I'm saying I didn't do it. And furthermore, when I burn, my right hand will be first into the fire. And that's exactly what he did. He burned his right arm off. I mean, this was incredible stuff. But it's all about trauma-based mind control. That's why I made the film, because it's about belief. It's about faith in something and a belief. And for people to go that far over a belief is extreme. So I was interested in what went on in the minds of these people. So I started reading about them, and it's a fascinating film. And yeah, you can find out about it on Patreon. You can see it. It's just there. Anyone can look at it. I'll be making the trailer soon. But I've been working on this project a few years. But this is a fascinating area, this area of belief and how far people will go for belief.
Precisely. I mean, when you think about it, under Stalin, we don't know the full figures, but it's something like 60 to 100 million people were killed. Under Mao, as people say, it's 1 billion. We don't know, but it was a lot of people. But you had to have kind of industrial process, and you had to have people prepared to not only create the reign of terror, but also to carry out these terrible executions and terrible things they did. And what I find particularly frightening is that they had a particular brand of educated twit, people that were academic, but yes or no, sir, and were completely dead from the neck upwards. And I've found that people that are satanic and that are evil, it kind of affects the atmosphere around them and you. You feel strange. There's an odd feeling. I went out with a girl once that was very strange, and she was very satanic, and it almost had a nervous breakdown with her. And she let off this really weird energy. And I've noticed now, you look in the media, what we've got is weird energy. We've got Chris Packham, David Attenborough, and Brian Cox. They are educated twits. They're misfits.
Well, they're very compliant, you see. They're not very bright, and they're easily programmed. Yeah.
And I would think that they probably give off a kind of negative atmosphere, a negative nothing. I mean, Chris Packham, you look at him in a wood or something, he looks a misfit. He looks out of place. David Attenborough walking in the jungles. He looks... He should be in an office. He looks as if he should be in an office. His body language.
Yeah, these people are promoted because of their compliant nature. I mean, it's well known that at the BBC they have parties and they look for people. They look for how people act when they've had a drink. Do they talk too much? What do they say? If you're too lively, you won't get in. I mean, this is the thing. So it's all worked out. And yes, I've experienced this quite a lot. I mean, I've been up against psychic attack quite a few times, and people go, "What's that?" You know, well, it's basically when negative energy hits you, and there's different ways it can happen. Some people actually get hit by a force. Some people actually see. I mean, I've seen these evil entities. I've actually tried to get rid of them, and you end up being attacked by them. And all this stuff is fascinating stuff. We can't get into it now. We're a bit late, but I think that over the weeks next forthcoming weeks we are going to be featuring Jerry Marzinski on this book, and do have a look at Demons Are Real on Winds on the World. And also I did one with you, Chris, which was about psychic attack and out-of-body experiences, and basically parapsychology, which is something I've been looking into for years. I've got huge research on all this stuff, but because we talk about the social engineering that affects people on a day-to-day basis, we don't get into it that much. But it's a very specialized area, and I don't like to be ambiguous about it, even though we're talking about something that is subjective to a lot of people. With me, it's become more objective because I can actually quantify these things. I mean, I know what the difference between a ghost is and a demon, for instance. I mean, they're two very different things. But this is why I found this Sumerian text so interesting, because they talk about possession in there. So you've basically got ghosts, which are just wandering lost souls, and then you've got these people who are actually possessed by these demonic entities, and that they've been taken over by these demonic entities. And then you've got the demonic entities themselves, which can jump into people or take them over. And I've known a lot of people over the years who've been into all this occult stuff, and the low level of it is just, it's disturbed energy basically. But sometimes these occultists do become very powerful. A lot of them become drug addicts and alcoholics, I found as well. There was the Crowleyites, people who follow this, that whole sort of area of this sort of low level Satanism, they seem to be quite weak people, a lot of them. But then sometimes you get these very malevolent characters who control them all, and that's what it is. So they might be magnetic, but in a very malevolent way. But sometimes, yeah, well, as you're saying, you can just pick up the energy field of these people, and it is almost like an attack. You know, I mean, that is a kind of extreme thing, but it's not that uncommon. It's not uncommon for that to happen. And I've actually dealt with people who've had demonic possession, and it's very, very draining to try and deal with it and try and stop it. So yeah, all this goes against the natural order of things, which is what we were talking about at the beginning, I think. So we'll probably wrap this up now, because we've been going into a lot of different areas here, and I don't want to get too complicated, but I find these Wednesday talks and the ones I do with you on Thursday, Chris, really fascinating. So yeah.
Likewise. And tomorrow, yes, I'll be on there tomorrow night. But the Thursday afterwards, I'll be at the that place looking at Hypnosis. So hopefully on the next day, Friday, if you're around, Mark, I could give you the lowdown on it. I think our viewers might be interested. So, stay tuned, because I'm going to find out about it. I'm and hopefully, as I say, if the woman she comes over positive and she sounds all right, I might even try and get her on the radio. On here, but you never know. Just.
Well, all of these things, it was the Mind, Body, Spirit Festival in California that really kicked off the New Age movement, and people like Maurice Strong, David Rockefeller were all behind it. They started a lot of this stuff off. There's a very interesting video on YouTube called Survival of Spaceship Earth. Spaceship Earth is one of these New Age terms that were put in, interdependence, codependence, vibrant, diverse communities, Spaceship Earth, Mother Gaia, all of these terms which we have come to know and get incredibly bored with. But yeah, Spaceship Earth.
The dream catcher, which looks like a pigeon that's collided with a kite,
Yeah, look, it looks like someone's trying to make a cobweb. Yeah.
If you want to make a fortune, open a New Age shop. People spend a fortune in it.
Well, they do, and it's incredible. I mean, you end up with crystals and joss sticks and basically books about rubbish. I think that the New Age thing is very funny, because you get these people on YouTube doing these New Age, and some of them get hundreds of thousands of views, and they don't actually say anything. They don't say anything. But that's the art of the New Age, is to keep it very word salad like, and sort of, well, we're in ascending consciousness, we're all ascending, and we're working on a higher level here. We don't want anyone bringing down the vibration of the group. It's all about a hive mind thing. It's perfect if you want a totalitarian system.
I know, because see what they're trying to do. They're trying to eradicate individualism. That's what I keep talking about. That's
exactly what it is. Individual becomes community. So the community becomes the individual.
Because that's why, when you look at it, most of the people have made great strides in this world. Like Henry Ford was an individual. Nikola Tesla, an individual. But you look at it in communist countries, they didn't advance very much, because individualism was but they tried to eradicate it, because everything was the team. You wasn't allowed. You had to be groupthink. And that's why you had Travant cars. The only thing that was advanced was the military, but anything for civilians was Victorian. And this is the thing, But anyway, it'll be quite interesting, this thing I'm going to. I hope it's not going to be full of dream catchers and people on drums going boom, boom, boom. I don't think so. But
I know what you're going to be doing, Chris. You're going to take your didgeridoo down there. I know, and you're going to be wearing your headdress. I know. Can't fool me.
Anyway, but
however, maybe we should call it a day there. What I want to get into in the next few weeks is this communitarianism, is the way it goes into all sectors of society. It's broadly what we've covered before, but I'm going to be going into things like community policing, how it doesn't have a resolution, how basically people become crime victims through communitarianism, all this sort of stuff. And it's good to be able to counter it. That's the idea. So, yeah, we'll be back on Thursday. I think I'm going to be talking to Chris tomorrow night, 7 p.m. on the Eric Von Essex channel.
Oh, you're on tomorrow?
Yes, I'm okay, Chris. I'm clear. I thought I'd let you know, because what happened was I was meant to be driving to Fairbourne tomorrow, but I'm actually going to go on Friday, so we can do tomorrow. It's no problem. I just found that out.
Oh, great! And as I say, the Thursday afterwards, as I say, I'll be with my dream catcher and my drum, the hypnosis session. So you might have seen me on Friday going, "Oh yeah, that's really good."
Well, Chris, until tomorrow night, namaste. Om Shanti.
Ta-ta. See you.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. It's really good that people are watching this, and it's great to see in chat. I love the chat, because it's usually in a parallel universe to what we're talking about. Thanks a lot, everybody, and see you soon. Look at windowsontheworld.net to find some stuff in the archive there. You'll find it very interesting. Cheers.